Hello, I'm Dr. Erin Yelland for K-State Research and Extension. The United States is currently experiencing the deadliest drug crisis in American history. And while states like Kansas have yet to be hardest hit by the crisis, deaths due to opioid use, misuse, addiction, and overdose are sweeping across our country at unprecedented rates. Now, Kansas hasn't been hardest hit like states like Ohio, West Virginia, and New Mexico, but researchers and experts suggest that soon enough, these deaths will be sweeping across the plains, just as they have done in other states. The opioid drug crisis is so prevalent that every day Americans are seeing images such as this flash across their TV screens, depicting America covered in pills, covered in drugs. We're also seeing images such as this, where overdose deaths are depicted in dark red colors. And while Kansas is not covered in dark red yet, researchers and experts again suggest that it won't be long until we see more deaths due to opioid use, misuse, addiction, and overdose coming across the plains. In fact, this crisis is so deadly that as of March 2018, 115 Americans die every single day from an opioid overdose, with that data coming from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The research and evidence is clear. The United States is experiencing a devastating opioid crisis, but there are steps that we can take to help slow this crisis down and hopefully eliminate it very soon. One of those steps is education, and K-State Research and Extension is dedicated to providing unbiased research-based information. And today we're going to be talking about the research and the expertise that's been provided on opioids thus far. Specifically, we're going to talk about what opioids are and why they're so addictive, the risks associated with taking opioids, the risk factors for opioid abuse. The last thing that we'll talk about today is how to make a difference. And although this seems like a monstrous crisis that the United States is currently experiencing, there are steps that individuals, families, and communities can take to help lessen the effects of this opioid crisis and hopefully help it to disappear altogether. But first, we're going to talk about what opioids are and those common forms of opioids, or the common names that are associated with prescription opioids. The most common prescription opioids that many Americans can recognize are drugs like fentanyl, Vicodin, morphine, and Percocet. So these prescription pain-relieving pills can oftentimes lead into illicit or illegal heroin use. The research shows that individuals who start off using prescription opioids but develop that intense craving to keep taking that pill and to keep having that pleasurable experience will oftentimes turn to heroin because it's cheaper and it might be easier to access. So regardless if this is a prescription medication that you're receiving because of a legitimate injury, or if you're taking the illegal drug heroin, these all act the same way on your body and can be incredibly addictive, which is why they're so scary. Now, it's also important to know that there are dozens of types of prescription opioids out there, but those opioids can be taken in numerous ways. So for individuals to receive a faster high, they may not take it orally as it was prescribed. Instead, they may dissolve it and inject it or snort it or even smoke it. So there are various ways that individuals can take these substances to get the high that they are so badly seeking, which can make it very scary because it can be so hard to pinpoint when someone is taking an opioid medication. That may look like they're taking a legitimate drug, but also they could be taking it in such an illicit way that they're hiding the behavior. So it's very important to realize that opioids come in many shapes and sizes, and they can be taken in a variety of ways. It is also so important to realize that anyone can become an opioid addict. Opioid addiction is affecting millions of people across the United States, regardless of your income, your race, your gender, your social class. This political cartoon highlights exactly what we are experiencing with this opioid crisis. There is no wrong answer. Anyone can become an opioid addict. And that's because we're experiencing such high prescribing rates that taking a dose for as little as 7 days can elicit this need in your body to keep having that drug. So if you have a legitimate surgery, or if you're illicitly seeking out that pleasurable experience, anyone can become an opioid addict. When we come back, we're going to talk about the risks associated with opioids and steps that you can take to help curb this crisis.
Your home's exterior is the best defense against harsh weather conditions. With insulated vinyl siding, energy-efficient windows, spray foam insulation, and metal roofing from AquaShield Roofing and Construction, you can protect your home from howling winds and ice-cold temperatures. Don't let Mother Nature interfere with the comfort of your home. Call or visit us online today for a free estimate. AquaShield Roofing and Construction. Our team is dedicated to your complete satisfaction.
Come on down to Bees Bargains at Smith Center, Kansas. We got the deals.
We have a wide variety of inventory like soap, toiletries, toys, mini fridges, even kitchen tables.
Everything is new at Bees Bargains, but it's all half the price. Yes, half price. That isn't just a good deal, that's a great deal.
And with new items daily, our inventory is constantly changing. That means new great deals are coming in by the truckload weekly.
Bees Bargains at Smith Center. If you can't find a deal here, you can't find one anywhere.
Welcome back. I'm Dr. Erin Yelland for K-State Research and Extension, and today we're talking about the opioid crisis that is currently devastating America. Next up, we're going to talk about the risks associated with taking prescription opioids, and there are many risks, and many of them are quite scary. The first of all is something that's associated with taking many drugs, but is more common with taking prescription opioids as well. And that is nausea, vomiting, and dry mouth. Some of those typical side effects that you'll see with many other drugs can be prevalent with taking prescription opioids as well. The next risk that is more commonly associated with those opioids are severe constipation. And in fact, you might have even seen commercials that are publicizing medication that can help to reduce the effects of constipation associated with taking opioids. Severe constipation is something that is so common with these drugs, and if you experience individuals seeking out laxatives in large amounts, that might be a sign that they are having an issue with opioids. Some other risks that are associated with taking prescription opioids are physical dependence, and that is when your body will physically experience withdrawal symptoms if you stop taking the drug. Physical dependence is so scary because you go through those withdrawal effects, and it could even be life-threatening in some situations. So if you know someone who's experiencing physical dependence of a drug or experiencing withdrawal, it is so important to get them help. The next risk associated with taking opioids is tolerance, and that is when your body requires more of the drug to experience the same effect that you had received previously. So instead of taking one pill to feel that effect, perhaps now you need to take 2 to experience that same effect, and that is called tolerance. The last risk factor associated with taking opioids, whether it is a prescription medication or the illicit drug heroin, is respiratory depression. And it is this respiratory depression that causes people to overdose and die by taking heroin or opioids. Respiratory depression occurs when your breathing rates slow down, and it slows down to the point where you stop breathing. And that is one of the biggest risks associated with opioids and why they can be so dangerous. There are also numerous risk factors for abuse. So perhaps individuals in your family member have been taking higher doses of prescription opioids on a daily basis. This puts them at higher risk for abuse. Individuals who also combine opioids with alcohol are also at a higher risk for abuse because it changes the effects that the opioids have on your body. Having a history of substance abuse or experiencing a prior overdose can also increase your risk factors for abuse. Finally, having a mental illness can increase your risk factor, but also living in rural areas and having a low income is a major risk factor for many adults to become opioid abusers. That's not to say that all individuals living in rural areas will experience a drug addiction or drug abuse or overdose, but many individuals who reside in these rural areas are disproportionately affected by opioid addiction and overdose. If you know someone who is struggling with opioid use, misuse, addiction, or overdose, it is so important that you know where to go for help. The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration associated with our federal government is the premier resource for those individuals. SAMHSA can be reached by calling 1-800-662-4357. You can also reach them online at samhsa.gov. Not only is it important to know where to send a struggling person, but it is also important to acquire some skills yourself to help someone who is in immediate need. And one of those skills is understanding the signs of an overdose. So many Americans have been exposed to an individual overdosing. And in fact, we see videos of individuals overdosing on the nightly news across America. If you recognize someone who is overdosing, you may be able to save their life. Some signs that you want to look for are shallow breathing, such as taking low and slow, deep breaths, or even gasping for air, someone sounding like they're struggling to breathe. Another sign is having pale skin. Having someone look like they're white as a ghost is something that we hear oftentimes. The last sign that you're going to want to look for is an individual who has blue lips and fingertips. In addition to that pale skin, blue lips and fingertips are a big red flag that that individual is not getting the necessary oxygen that their body needs. And that is a sign that that individual needs immediate help. So what do you do if you notice these signs of an overdose in someone? There are 3 steps to take. The first step is to rouse them and stimulate them. Try to wake them up if they are unconscious. And one of the main ways to do that is to make a fist with your knuckle and dig your knuckles into their breastbone and move it in a circular motion. If you do this to yourself, you can see that it can be quite painful. But if you are standing atop someone and you use those knuckles to dig into their breastbone, they're going to wake up if they are able to because of that pain that induces when you stimulate that breastbone. The next thing that you're going to want to do is to call 911. If you have another person with you, hopefully you can be trying to rouse and stimulate while the other individual is calling 911 immediately. But we always need to call 911. The next step that you'll want to take after calling 911 is to shout out and see if anyone nearby has naloxone. Naloxone is that drug that can be administered to instantly reverse the effects of an opioid overdose. I said before that when you take an opioid, there's a certain chemical reaction in your brain that happens. But when you administer naloxone, that chemical reaction immediately stops, and a person can essentially go back to their normal breathing routine. But it is so important to realize that even after an individual receives naloxone, they still need to go and receive emergency medical treatment because there may be lasting effects of the overdose that they just experienced. Even if you aren't sure what to do, if you see someone overdosing, remember the 3 steps. Rouse and stimulate, dig your knuckles into their breastbone and try to wake them up. Call 911, and if you have naloxone, administer it. When we come back, we're going to talk more about the opioid crisis in Kansas and steps that you can take to help reduce the effects of this devastating epidemic.
Make a difficult choice an easy one with Cedar View Assisted Living's knowledgeable and caring staff. Your loved one will be professionally taken care of as they transition into their new community. With movies, holiday parties, planned exercises, and games, residents will have opportunities every day to enjoy their time at Cedar View. Multiple room styles are available, ensuring a just right fit for your loved one. Come see Cedar View Assisted Living for yourself next to Sternberg Museum. The care you need, the home you want.
Storage Solutions is invested in complete customer satisfaction. You can choose a drive-up unit or a climate-controlled unit. Plus, you can choose from storage units of all sizes to fit your inventory. And that's not all. They'll sign for your packages and deliver and unload them into your unit. Storage Solutions has been named in the top 100 U-Haul dealers 6 times. Rent a pickup, cargo van, or moving truck to keep your goods on the go. Remember, making moving and storing easy is Storage Solutions in Hayes and Victoria.
Welcome back. I'm Dr. Erin Yelland for K-State Research and Extension, and today we're talking about opioids. Next step is so important, and we're going to be talking about how to properly store your medications. The number one rule of thumb is to think of storing your medications just as you would a firearm, especially if you have small children in the house, for example. So you always want to keep your medications in a safe and secure location. And remember, your dining room table, your nightstand, or even your medicine cabinet in your home is not a safe and secure location. Any individual can have access to those pills, whether it's a small child or even another adult. So keep those medications in a place where they are not easily obtained. It's also recommended to use a lockbox. Almost all pharmacies across the United States sell medication lockboxes that can be used to lock up your medications. Even if you don't have prescription opioids in your home, it's so important to consider utilizing that lockbox so that animals or children don't get into your medication and take them and have unnecessary side effects from medication that they shouldn't have had in the first place. So it's so important that you are not keeping your medication in areas where people can easily have access to it. Lastly, even if you take that medication on a daily basis or you take it 2 or 3 times a day, every time you take it, it is so important to return it to that original safe location. We never would want an individual, a child, or even a pet to get access to our opioid medications and potentially experience very harmful negative effects. And if that doesn't convince you, think of it this way. 1 dose of some prescription opioid medications is enough to kill a child. We do not want to keep these medications out in the open and leave ourselves open to that risk. It is so important to store them properly. The next thing that we're going to talk about is how to safely dispose of your medications. So when you're done taking a prescription medication, what do you do with it? It is not the right answer to just dump it down the sink or throw it in your household trash. There are different steps that we should take to dispose of those medications safely and properly. The most preferred way to dispose of any medication is at a prescription drug take-back event. The DEA requires that law enforcement agencies provide 2 drug take-back events per year. But in your community, you may find that there are more options than those 2. You might also find that there are pharmacies or law enforcement offices or even a public health office that routinely takes back medications of all kinds on a daily basis. Look in your community, ask around, call your local extension office to see where you can safely dispose of medications. If that's not an option for you, there are some other tips and tricks to safely disposing of your medication. The next one being utilizing a medication disposal bag. This is a relatively new product that's out on the market to help dispose of medications safely and properly. So essentially, you take your medication, you put it in a bag with some chemicals, you add water, and the medication dissolves and essentially becomes inactive. This is a great way to dispose of your medication because it is no longer ingestible. No one's going to have any interest in taking that medication once it has been disposed of in that medication disposal bag. The next thing that I want you to think about is properly disposing of your medication in your household trash. It is not recommended to simply take a pill bottle and toss it in the trash can. Instead, it is recommended that you empty your pills with an undesirable substance. That undesirable substance could be used kitty litter, used coffee grounds, maybe even dirt. Mix it up with that undesirable substance, seal it in a plastic baggie, and throw it away in your trash. You also want to make sure that you're disposing of your medication bottles separately from the medication itself. You always also want to destroy the label on your medication because unfortunately, people who are addicted to opioids or who are trying to gain access to opioids will go through your trash cans, see what prescription pill bottles you have, and if they see an opioid medication, they may target your home to break in and gain access to those medications. It is so important that you know how to properly store your medications, but also properly dispose of them so that we can eliminate people gaining improper access to these drugs. Lastly, there are some differences that you can make in your own life and in that of your community when it comes to this opioid crisis. And the first one, I always love to say, knowledge is power. So just by being here today and learning more about opioids, you are getting a step up on this opioid crisis, and you are more prepared now than you were before. Keep asking questions, keep learning more about the crisis, and keep asking steps that you can take to make a difference in your community. The next thing to keep in mind is that communication is key. If you know someone in your family or a friend is struggling with opioid use, misuse, addiction, or overdose, talk to that person and see if you can get them help, see if they're willing to receive help. And if not, go and talk to someone about how you can potentially get that person involved in the treatment that they need. Next, promote safe disposal opportunities. If you research and find in your community that there is no safe way to dispose of medications with the proper agencies or authorities, talk to those individuals and see if you can make that opportunity happen. Perhaps it's a single drug take-back event once a month or once a year for your community. Whatever it is, it's going to make a bigger difference than having nothing. Lastly, it is so important that we are talking to medical professionals about the Center for Disease Control and Prevention's opioid prescribing guidelines. The research shows that we have gotten into this opioid crisis because of overprescribing rates. Medical doctors have been overprescribing opioid medications for years, and because of that, researchers and experts suggest that that is why we are currently experiencing this devastating epidemic. So talk to your doctor and ask, are you following the proper guidelines that the CDC has put forth? Perhaps you talk to a nurse in that office and make mention of these guidelines. But simply talking about that can make a prescriber more aware of the ramifications of prescribing opioids, but also the steps that they need to take to ensure that they are giving the proper prescriptions to individuals. Lastly, it is so important to make sure that naloxone is available in your community. The quicker that an individual can receive naloxone, naloxone is that drug that reverses the effects of an opioid overdose, the better that individual will be. But if no one in your community has access to naloxone, that individual can potentially have devastating consequences, such as death. So if that's making sure that your local emergency officials are equipped with naloxone, school teachers, perhaps even librarians, Think of those individuals who are key stakeholders in your community that are around and that could be present if an emergency happens. The research and evidence is clear. The United States is experiencing a deadly drug crisis, but there are steps that we can take to help curb the effects of this crisis and to eliminate further deaths from happening. If you have questions about resources in your community or how you can make a difference on the opioid crisis in Kansas, contact your local K-State Research and Extension office. We are dedicated to improving the lives of all Kansans and providing information on this devastating crisis. I'm Dr. Erin Yelland for K-State Research and Extension. Thank you for joining us today.